As a detective, I'd say 90% of my job revolves around facts. Hard evidence and facts that, if called upon to do so, I can wrap up with a bow and present for the lawyers to pull out in court to prove the case they're trying to build. Having said that, 10% of what I do is not just about facts. 10% revolves around the intangibles, the unseen strings that hold the narrative together. The hunches, feelings, and instincts that lead you as a detective in the right direction and help you find those harder pieces of evidence in the first place. The logical stuff is the bricks of a case. The detective's feelings for it, the mortar. I can tell you now that with the chat room case, there was far more intangible than there was concrete. And the feeling I got about it, well, I can only describe it as a bad one. So, here are the facts. Do with them what you will. Although the coroner eventually chalked her death up to a suicide, for about 3 weeks I was asked to inspect the death of Katie Bridges as a homicide. Mostly because her mom would not leave the station or stop screeching to us to do something until I did. To be fair to the coroner, on the surface of things, the whole mess did look awfully familiar and just like a typical suicide. On the surface, it was just a case of stereotypical depressed teenager takes an overdose of pills and tragically ends up in the morgue. Horrible, far too common. But not all that unusual, or, in fact, a homicide. It was only when, at Katie's mom's insistence and behest, the surface of this seemingly open and shut case was scratched a little, that we realized just how little of that usual stereotypical story applied in this case. Firstly, there were the reports from and interviews with those close to Katie. The friends, the teachers, and the schoolmates who all offered eyewitness accounts that seemed completely at odds with what she had chosen to do. According to every person interviewed, Katie was a bright girl, sensitive, and overall cheery girl. She scored in the top 3% in all of her classes, was fairly popular, and had a close-knit group of friends. Outside of class, she enjoyed sports, socialized regularly, and according to everyone we asked, had a great relationship with her parents. Taken at face value, and on the word of those we spoke to, the image of the stereotypical depressed teenager I had expected to find disappeared entirely. Then there was the diary. Now, despite being a detective and naturally curious to the point of being intrusively nosy, I still felt a little uncomfortable about going through the diary of a recently deceased teenage girl. However, her mom, who had already read through the thing, insisted. What a quick scan over the contents revealed was that again, the depressed suicidal teen image didn't fit. There were none of the ponderous, navel-gazing short essays to self-obsession that filled many teenage diaries, nor the pages of screaming capitals scored into the pages after an argument in which she claimed to hate her parents, her life, and everything that existed. In fact, Katie's diary was almost the exact opposite. Katie seemed perfectly happy, and unless she had gone to the trouble of masking her emotions in a diary, which would be pointless as it seemed unlikely, she was actually doing better than most. However, there were two suspicious details. Firstly, the mention throughout the last 2 weeks' entries in the diary of a guy whose screen name or handle or whatever was Gray-Faced Drew. This Drew was some boy that Katie had met online and who she had been chatting to frequently on a chat room site that she'd visited almost daily. This Drew seemed to really have charmed Katie, and she was clearly deeply enamored with him, despite her friends having never heard her mention him. In her diary, she was keeping almost a countdown to the day when Drew was going to, in her words, tell me the secret. The fact that she was talking to this boy, and even that she was going on to these chat rooms, came as a huge surprise to her mother and was one of the main things that got her so convinced that her daughter's death was not self-inflicted. Logs from the site showed that Katie had spoken to Drew sometimes for hours in the chat room daily for around a fortnight. This was the kind of intangible detail or thread that seemed worth following. The more concrete element came from the toxicology report. Usually when a desperate teen decides to take their own life, they are in such a confused and vulnerable state that they reach for the first pills to hand. Aspirin, Advil, paracetamol, whatever they can find in the medicine cabinet. Katie, however, had taken a very specific cocktail of drugs administered to her body in the form of 2 red pills she had gotten from a small bottle containing 12. Pills that seemed to have been posted to her. The bottle, which was found in her room after the fact, alongside the packaging it was delivered in, was labeled Happy Pills. Someone had sent these pills to her through the mail. Someone, according to Katie's mother, had convinced her to take them and end her own life. Of course, suspect number 1 was her new online love interest, the mystery, Greyface Drew. Looking the name of this character up on the internet yielded very little in terms of concrete information. The only thing that I could find was that this user posted in a Facebook group that was supposed to be about nihilism but instead seemed dedicated to collecting memes that focused quite heavily on suicide as a positive idea. The fact that Drew had been a member of this group for almost 7 years made me begin to suspect that he was actually a bit older than Katie, and older than he claimed to be in their conversations. I pressed the company that hosts the chat room Katie used for information. The representative said they could provide the logs of the conversation showing who Katie talked to and for how long, but the actual content of the conversations was deleted once the users logged off to preserve their anonymity and privacy. This seemed ridiculous to me. In an age of mass organized crime that deals with drug and people trafficking, not to mention the possibility of terrorism, having a platform where people could discuss things completely anonymously with absolutely no real record of the content seemed outrageous. I was about to tell the guy as much when he unexpectedly went on, continuing to explain that despite the fact that they couldn't release the content of the conversations, they were, as a matter of fact and coincidence, already looking into a band for this character named Greyface Drew. When I asked why, he said that I was the 14th law enforcement officer in 6 months to call about this particular user, to identify him by name and to request to see records. 14 calls about 14 teenagers from all over the world. Some male, some female, all linked by 2 simple facts. They had all used this chat site, and they had all taken their own lives. Would you like to guess? The rep asked coldly. Exactly how many chat partners the log says that Greyface Drew has had so far? He told me, but of course I could already have guessed. In total, before he was banned, this individual calling himself Greyface Drew, whom we assume was male, spoke in private chat rooms to 14 people. Every single one of them took their own lives. Why? Well, we don't know. What is interesting is that when I compared notes with some of the other officers looking into this, all of them mentioned their victims counting down to the day when Greyface was going to tell them or show them the secret. Some of my colleagues have suggested that this was simply his way of making the abuse he planned to throw more pointed and affecting, that he would take the time to make the victim seem comfortable, to build these vulnerable teenagers up as if the secret was going to be important, only for it to turn out to be a devastating put-down, a withering assessment of their worth that would be horribly damaging to a developing mind. Imagine, after building up the secret for a week, a month or longer, it turned out just to be the fact that you are ugly, the truth that you look like something that should be in Jurassic Park, or the hideous insistence that nobody loves you and nobody ever will. My colleague theorized that this cruel psychological trick, building up the poor kid's sense of belonging, attractiveness, and self-esteem by being a new friend or potential crush, only then to tear them to tatters, could be a deliberate technique and could have a devastating effect on the victim when their relationship turned out to be a vicious sting in the tail. It was an intriguing idea, but also one I never quite believed. Kids get bullied, sometimes horribly, But would the opinion of one relatively stranger drive a kid to suicide? It has in the past, I know, tragically more than once. But from the little I learned about Katie in my few days getting to know her through her friends and her diaries, I just couldn't see it. There had to be something else, some message or idea that this gray face was sharing with them. Something that was either so terrifying that it drove the kids to a near madness in which suicide seemed the only way out, or else it was something so desperately and hideously bleak that it destroyed all hope that they had had up until that point held on to. What such a message or secret might consist of? I don't know. What exactly could he have said to them, convinced them of, or suggested that would force what seemed to be perfectly healthy kids to do such a thing? We don't know, and likely never will. The sad thing is that by banning Drew from their chat room and linked platforms, the company thought they were doing the right thing. In fact, they only succeeded in making him more difficult to trace. When we knew which platform he used, what name he used, and who he tended to talk to, we had a good chance of tracking him down. Now he could be anywhere, logging on as anyone and saying whatever god-awful things that it is he whispers into the ears of children to make them do such terrible things.